All right, can we give it up for the band and the great job that they did tonight? Woo! I love that new song in tonight, and it's actually one of my favorites. So for those of you who don't know me, I am Katie, and I'm one of the youth interns here at Life Church. And so as part of being an intern, something that Dan and Steve allow us to do is get up here and preach a sermon every once in a while. And so that's what I get to do for you guys tonight. And so in case you're either new here tonight or you haven't been here at 621, like Dan said earlier, we're currently in our 5-week sermon series called For the Win. And today is our 4th week, but before I get into what I'm going to be talking about, I'm just going to quickly recap what everybody else has been discussing. So the first week, Dan got up here and talked about how being gentle is greater than being harsh. And then the second week, Steve talked about how doing takes you places, talking won't. And then last week we heard from Pam, and she talked about relationships and how everything that you do starts in your heart. And like I said, today is our 4th week, and today we're talking about generosity. Because the bottom line about generosity is that generosity can take you places selfishness never will. And before I dig in too much about generosity, I'm really honest with you guys, because when I first looked at the curriculum tonight to see what I would be discussing, I don't know. So I guess it doesn't want me to be honest, but I'm going to continue and be honest with you guys anyway because I think it's worth it. So when I first looked at the curriculum and saw that I was going to be speaking on generosity, I was very kind of bummed and I wasn't sure what to think. And then I began to pray, and I realized that maybe the reason why I didn't want to speak about generosity is because that there was something I didn't want to get up here and actually talk about. That there was something going on in my life that I didn't want to bring today. Do we have a microphone or something? Okay. And so what I realized,
Unmute my wireless one. Wireless one, unmute it.
are we there? Are we there? Hello? Hello? Can I just have your microphone, Dan? Or maybe I should just...
Sam. Okay.
All right, thank you guys. All right, and so as I began to pray and ask God about what it was that maybe I wasn't willing to speak about here tonight, God showed me that the sermon I was going to preach tonight wasn't just about generosity. Because the only thing about generosity is that generosity isn't about just being generous and giving of things in your life. Generosity, first and foremost, is about trusting in God. And that's what I didn't want to talk about because in my life, I have struggled a lot with trusting in God. But I wanted to bring it up because generosity and trust actually go hand in hand. Because generosity will take you places, selfishness never will. But in order to have generosity take you somewhere, you must first be willing to trust in God. So this jersey that I'm wearing tonight, it's a soccer jersey, and it represents the country of Guatemala. And for those of you who don't know me, I've been traveling back and forth to Guatemala about the past 5 years in my life, and I've been doing missions work down there. And so for me, this jersey just doesn't represent the country of Guatemala. It represents many times in my life when I've had to trust in God. And there's one specific story that I want to share from you guys tonight, and it's from 2015. And in 2015, I was able to spend 5 weeks living in Guatemala doing missions work. And almost immediately when I got down to Guatemala and I reached Guatemala City, I felt like God was putting it on my heart to give a missionary friend of mine $100. And immediately I was like, nope, no way, God. I was like, this is not going to happen. Because in the back of my mind, and I knew God knew this, but in the back of my mind, I didn't even have $100 with me, and I had no means of receiving $100. But every single time I would pray about it and say, God, is this something that I'm really hearing from you from? Each time he would just respond and say, Katie, will you trust me? Will you trust in me to provide for you in this situation? And so it took me a little bit because I'm kind of a stubborn person, but I eventually said yes to God. And soon enough, the weeks of my trip passed, and so we got to the last week of my trip. And I began to doubt God a little bit because it was the 5th week of my trip, and I was going to be heading back here to the United States soon. And I started to doubt God and doubt whether or not he would actually show up. And so the last week of our trip, the ministry that I was working with, there was a group of about 5 or 6 of us, and we went and worked with a separate ministry. And as we were working with the other ministry and saying our goodbyes to them, the leader of the ministry walked over and handed my leader enough cash for each of us to receive $100. And so as we were driving back to where we lived in Guatemala, the leader told us that we would each be receiving $100, and she told us about how we received it. And instantly, I was super, super excited because I started to think about me and all the things that I could get for $100, because to me, $100 is still a big deal, and it's not every day that somebody walks up and gives you $100. And then God came into the picture, and he was like, Katie, I've got news for you. That money is not for you. And he was like, this is the money that I have provided for you to go and give Amanda. And instantly, I couldn't even be mad. I wasn't even bummed about the fact that I wouldn't be receiving this money, because I realized in that moment that when I had the faith and the amount of trust in God, that he actually did show up and he did provide that for me. Because you see, believing in God and trusting in him is hard, which is why living a life of generosity and trusting in him is hard. And that's why I didn't want to stand up here today and just talk about generosity. I wanted to avoid doing the hard thing about bringing up trusting in God. As humans, it's in our nature to want things. There are many things that we all want. James 4:2 in the first half of the verse says, you desire but do not have. And that's because we all have desires and wants. For example, I know that Apple is coming out with a new iPhone later on this year, so maybe you're hoping and really texting and reminding your parents about the fact that you want this newest upgrade. Or with Valentine's Day just being yesterday, maybe you're hoping and wanting, and you have that desire in your heart that by next year at this time, you will have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Or maybe you've been looking online and you really want the newest pair of Lululemon yoga pants. Or maybe Michael Jordan just came out with a new pair of shoes, and maybe that's something that you're hoping to be able to scrape enough money together to purchase. Because you see, as humans, we're never fully satisfied with the things that we have. And that's because more is an appetite. And the more you receive, the more you want. And so maybe you're sitting here and you're asking yourself, okay, but what's the big problem? We all have these wants and desires. And that's true. Each of us right now has something that we could think about, something that we're looking forward to receiving, or something that we want. And there's a very big problem with wanting more. Because in wanting more, it's leading all of us to a very dissatisfied life. Wanting more and trying to find satisfaction in wanting more is like trying to chase something you're never going to be able to catch. The second half of Ecclesiastes 6:9 says, just dreaming about nice things is meaningless, like chasing the wind. So trying to become satisfied in wanting more is like trying to catch air. I could stand up here all day long and say, watch me. I'm going to reach out my fist, and I'm going to catch some air. And you guys are all like, yeah, that's never going to happen. But I could stand up here hoping all day long and saying, I'm going to catch some air. I'm going to catch some air. And that's what happens when we all look at materialistic things and saying, that iPhone is going to satisfy me, or that boyfriend will satisfy me, or those yoga pants is going to satisfy me. It's just not going to happen. Like all appetites, our appetite for wanting more, it can be satisfied, but only for a certain amount of time. How many of you here tonight can remember what you got for Christmas? All right, so I'm going to make it a little bit harder since Christmas was just a few months ago. How many of you can remember what you got for Christmas 2 years ago? All right, so Zaven and a few other people remember what they got for Christmas 2 years ago. But for most of us, we can't remember what we got for Christmas 3 years ago or even 5 years ago. But my guess is that many of us here tonight all know that we put time and energy and emotion into trying to get that thing that we eventually wanted. And the reason why we put all that time and energy into it is because we did want it in that moment, and we thought that thing would satisfy us. But now most of us sit here wondering what it even was that we received. And that's because whatever it was that we did receive did not fully satisfy us. So I want all of you guys here today who love food to raise your hand. And because Steve isn't here tonight, you can raise your left hand too, because truthfully, I don't understand his whole left hand thing doesn't count. So look around. Can you guys keep your hands up? All right, so if you love food, raise your hand. And then now look around. I'm pretty sure all of us just raised our hand. And that's because each of us, hopefully, if you're here tonight, you have a stomach. And your stomach has an appetite. But your stomach can only be satisfied for a certain amount of time. Most of us today have probably eaten 3 meals. We ate breakfast, and then we became hungry again. We ate lunch, and then we became hungry again. We ate dinner, and then we became hungry again. And that's because your stomach has an appetite for food, and it can only be satisfied for a certain amount of time. And the same is true for wanting more. Your appetite for wanting more can only be satisfied for a certain amount of time. You may want and want and want. And eventually, maybe, if you're lucky, you'll receive it. And then you're happy for a short amount of time, and then you go back to wanting more and wanting more and wanting more. And it's a very, very vicious cycle that we're stuck on for most of our lives. And the reason for this cycle is because you cannot serve 2 masters. Matthew 6:24 says, "No one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate one or love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." And so what Matthew is saying here is that you can't try and serve God and then also place something else closer to your heart than God. That is just not something that is possible. But if you're here tonight and you feel like you are stuck on this repetitive cycle of wanting more and wanting more and wanting more, you're not a bad person, because most of us here tonight feel the same thing. You're completely normal. And that's because no one woke up today saying, "Hi, I'm Katie. I want to have a dissatisfied life." All of us want to be satisfied. But the reason for this is that because from a very young age, we have all learned how to say words like more and give me, but we were never taught how to be satisfied with the things that we did receive. And thankfully, there is a way off this cycle, because God didn't design us to be consumers, but givers. God didn't design you to simply just take in and receive time and time again. The way we were designed and the way He created us was so that we could go out and give from what we have. You see, wanting more and your appetite for wanting more does have an antidote, and it's called generosity. And for us as Christians, thankfully, we have plenty of references for how we can live this generous life. And so in this sermon series, we've been doing we've been reading from the book of Proverbs a lot. And so tonight, the verse I have for you is from the book of Proverbs. And for those of you who don't know, the book of Proverbs is a book about wisdom and truth written by a guy named King Solomon. And so the verse I want to talk about tonight is Proverbs 11:25, which says, "A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed." And what I love about this verse is because it doesn't just provide hope for those of us who are stuck in this vicious cycle of wanting more. This verse is actually a direct promise from God. God says when you are generous, you will prosper. And when you take that time to be generous and refresh others, in turn, you will be refreshed. But in order to have that satisfied life and in order to be content, it all starts with trusting in God. And the natural overflow of trusting in God will be that generous life. So I want to split this verse into two parts and talk about both parts separately. And so the first half of the verse says, "A generous person will be prosperous." All of us want to be prosperous and successful in this life that we're living. But what King Solomon is saying is that the key to being prosperous is generosity. The key to being prosperous, which is generosity, goes against everything that the culture keeps telling us in the world that we live in. Because the world that we live in tells us time and time again that if you have a great job, then you're prosperous. Or if you have a big home, or if you make lots of money and you're wealthy, then you're a prosperous person. But that's not the way the Bible defines it. The Bible says you are a prosperous person through generosity. And a prosperous person is someone who beats the appetite of wanting more instead of allowing that appetite to beat them. A generous person looks at what they have not as a means to make themselves happy, but as a means to make others happy. Because like I said, our bottom line is that generosity will take you where selfishness never will. So in this case, generosity will take you to a life of prosperity. And that is something that selfishness can never get you. So the word prosperous here, and the way King Solomon uses it, actually means to be filled or to be fully satisfied. So by being generous, that helps you fully satisfy your hunger for wanting more. And I know in our culture today, oftentimes we think, but if I give away, then I will have less. But King Solomon is saying that that is not true, and the exact opposite will actually happen. Because by giving away, you will actually be filled more. You'll be filled with more happiness, more influence, more joy, more purpose. And I believe you might even have more friends. Because how many of us hate being around people who are constantly giving things away? And just like wanting more has an appetite, generosity also has an appetite too. Many of us here in this room participated in 30 days for $30 last month, and it just wrapped up last month, and many of us loved it. We loved being able to spend quality time with the people in our small group and with our leaders, and we loved being able to go out and give the money that we had and give back to our community and be able to make a difference in that world. And even more so, we didn't want it to stop. That's because the more generous you are, the more generous you want to be. Now, the second half of this verse says, "Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed." So by giving of things like your time and your talents and your treasure, you're not only going out and blessing others, you're also refreshing yourself as well. And so I know the word refreshed is kind of odd here, and it's not really a word that we use that often. So instead of just giving you a definition of what it means, I want to try and give you a couple examples of what it might be for you guys as students to be refreshed. So quite a few of us play sports, and in order to be on the team, that often involves practices during the summer. And even though we live in Michigan, it does get hot during the summer days, and so you have to go to practice, otherwise you can't be on the team during the school year. And so imagine you've been out running around on the field for an hour, and you're sweating, and the sun is beating down on you, and the coach finally blows the whistle, and you're able to run over to the sideline and get that cool drink of water or that Gatorade. You're able to take that breath, and you're able to just take a moment to be with yourself and to allow your whole body to rest. And in that moment, oftentimes you actually feel like you have more energy to go out and conquer the rest of your practice. And that's because you've been refreshed. That is the life King Solomon is saying that you will receive when you are a generous person. Because a prosperous and a refreshing life is obtainable, but it all starts with you trusting God. And the 3 areas I want you guys to concentrate this week on trusting God are with your time and your talents and your treasure. And I know here at 621 we discuss time, talents, and treasure a lot, but that's because they're really, really close to God's heart. And I believe that anything close to God's heart is worth bringing up often. So the first one is time. And Dan, a few months ago, I think it was in October or maybe November, we did our Sweet Tea sermon series. And at the end of his sermon, he used $24, actually he used $23 and a handful of change to represent 24 hours in the day. And he challenged us to go home and figure out where we were spending our time. So have you figured it out yet? Do you know where you're spending your time each day? Because chances are each of us have some way we could be spending our time better. So instead of wasting our time on things that don't matter, you could use your time, for example, to go out and volunteer in kids' church once a month. Or you could spend your time building better relationships with the people around you. Or you could spend quality time with your family. Or you could work on building up your relationship with God. And so the second part is talents. Each and every one of you in this room today has been gifted talents by God. And those talents are unique to you. So what are your talents? What do you have to give to the world that only you can give? For example, when I was younger, I knew that I was good at watching kids and babysitting. And so whenever I heard of a family in need, I would offer to babysit for free. And that was my way of using my talents and my time to be generous to others. And if you're here tonight and you don't know what your talent is, that is completely okay. But I just want to encourage you to go out and to try something new and see if you're good at it. And if you're not, that's okay. Just try and find something. So if you're good at singing, then try out for the band here at 621. Or if you love to read, then volunteer at your local library. Or if you're really good at technology, then figure out a way to help teach others. Because believe it or not, technology is actually very, very complicated and hard to understand sometimes. And then lastly is your treasure. And just like talents, your treasure is only for you. Because you are the only one who can figure out whatever is closest to your heart. Because your treasure is whatever you hold closest to your heart. So maybe your family is closest to your heart, or friends, or food, or education, or sports, or maybe even your faith. What is closest to your heart, and what do you hold closest to your heart? If friends are close to your heart, then maybe you can buy some snacks at 621 and share it with the people at your table. Or maybe if clothing is close to your heart, then maybe every few months, go through your closet and figure out things that you can give away. Or maybe faith is closest to you. So go out and share God's love with the people he has placed in your life. Or maybe, like I said, maybe family is closest to you. So spend some quality time with them this week. Or maybe money is closest to you, and you can go out and give back to your community or even your church. But whatever your treasure is, don't leave it hidden. Because if you are generous and share whatever you have, what's closest to your heart, I promise you that you will never be left empty-handed. So a generous life is something that's actually very hard to describe. But we all know what it looks like, and we can all identify a generous person in a crowd. Because a generous person is the person who comes up to you and says, "Hey, how are you doing tonight?" Or a generous person is the person who takes out the trash without even being asked. Or a generous person is somebody who watches their siblings without even complaining. Or maybe a generous person is that teacher who spends their whole lunch period helping you with your homework. Because generosity manifests itself in many different ways. But at the end of the day, it all starts with a person who says, "Yes, God, I trust you." Now, I haven't been following God very that long, and I have so many things that I still need to learn. But I do know this one thing to be true. That if you trust God with your time and your talents and your treasure, then I promise you that the generosity that overflows from your decision to trust God will take you places you could have never gone before.